Hi guys, welcome back to another episode of Lily's Little Life Corner. In today's episode, ignore the writing in the whiteboard behind me because I did not erase it, but in today's episode we will be talking about fem cells and if they are doing more harm than good. That is what we're going to be talking about this week. As always, make sure to check the links in my description because I will be including links to further inform you guys about this topic, but also in the links in my description and show notes, that's where you can find my new Tumblr, which is where you can get updates on if any podcast episodes will be delayed, and you can also participate in coming up with new ideas or telling me what you want to see with my content, so make sure to go ahead and follow that Tumblr linked in the show notes and in the description, and also my merch and Patreon will be linked in the show notes and description as well. So like I said, today we will be talking about fem cells and if they're doing more harm than good. Disclaimer, I'm not a psychologist, I'm just a psychology enthusiast, and so a lot of the things that I say will be purely based on speculation. I don't actually know these women, I've never really interacted with their content, so even though I'm telling you, well, I think it's X, Y, and Z, you should not act on that and you should not go to their pages and comment, oh, you're doing this because of X, Y, and Z. These are just my opinions. I am not an expert and I have no expert backing to back my statements up. But anyway, let's get into it. So what is a fem cell? A fem cell is a female incel. What is an incel, I hear you asking? I've talked about incels on my podcast before, but incel stands for involuntarily celibate. Now, this name might seem innocuous or harmless, but it has turned into a very awful community. Involuntarily celibate communities used to just be communities of men coming together and saying, yeah, we haven't gotten laid and we are in our 20s, we're in our 30s. It's kind of very sad, but we're going to focus on empowering each other and wishing each other the best. It was a very positive community, but it started turning into something completely different. It started turning into these men hating the women that wouldn't give them a chance. These communities got their start because these men had been fed this idea that nice guys finish last, and so they perceived themselves to be nice, and they kept thinking, well, why haven't I gotten laid? I'm in my 20s, I'm in my 30s, every movie that I watch, every book that I read, every show that I watch, every song that I listen to tells me that there is something wrong with me if I have not gotten laid by the age of 15, and I am now in my 20s or in my 30s. So like I said, it started as a community for like-minded men to voice their frustrations and talk about their insecurities, but then those insecurities started being weaponized, turning it into the toxic community that it is now. It started turning into these men becoming violent towards the women that wouldn't give them a chance. Not just violent on social media posts and commenting on their social media posts talking about how women are objects, but also violent in real life, which we will touch on a little bit later. It became a very toxic and harmful community, just full of men wanting to control the women in their lives so that they could finally get laid. So what is a femcel? What is a female incel? Not exactly the same thing as a male incel. Female incel spaces most of the time are not as popular as male incel spaces, or at least they used to not be. But female incels kind of differ from male incels in the sense that they don't have as much support. Let's put it that way. Again, tides are changing, but in the past, they haven't had as much support as male incels. And that is because a lot of the media kind of revolves around men being players and women choosing only one man for the rest of their life. And that kind of being the stereotype or stigma surrounding those kinds of heterosexual relationships, right? And not just media, but also women in other women's lives would tell the younger women in their families, it's okay if your husband cheats on you, but you have to be a loyal woman. Misogyny, essentially. Whenever femcels would talk about their standards, they would kind of be ridiculed. However, whenever male incels would talk about their standards, they would be agreed with. Oh, and also, there was not as much violence within femcel communities as within male incel communities. That's probably the biggest difference. Femcells have been around for a very long time, but recently femcells have gained a lot of popularity online. And that is because of the past 2 episodes that I have been talking about, the conversations that I have been having in the past 2 episodes, where so many men nowadays are being highly incompetent and borderline abusive towards their significant others. This has created an opening for femcells to get this rise in popularity and start advocating for supposedly female independence. But are they actually advocating for female independence, or are they just making things worse? Now, it's important for you guys to understand that these women do not call themselves femcells, and often they're not involuntarily celibate. They're voluntarily celibate if they are in any way celibate. But I'm referring to them as femcells because of the same kind of toxicity and violence that regular male incels tend to have towards the opposite gender. Which in no way means that I am comparing the violence exhibited from male incel communities to the violence exhibited in the female incel communities. It's both violence. However, male incel communities are advocating for physical violence against the women that reject them, whereas the female incel communities are advocating for verbal violence, which is obviously not in any way comparable, but both are still highly toxic behaviors, to say the least. A lot of their toxicity stems from that same idea that they are owed a relationship and that the opposite gender owes them things, not just being in a relationship, but owes them certain characteristics, certain traits, certain quantities of money. That's why I'm referring to them as femcells, but they're not actually involuntarily celibate. Now, as you guys know, I'm someone who encourages my friends to leave toxic relationships. That's kind of what I've been known for within my friend groups. Whenever my friends have an issue with their relationships, they tend to come to me to give them advice. And my advice, kind of more often than not, is leave that man. Because that man is really awful and you don't deserve that kind of treatment. So, in a way, when I first found these femcell creators, I kind of found them relatable, especially when they would say things like, you deserve better, you should have higher standards for yourself. I most definitely agreed. However, when I stopped agreeing with them was when they started exhibiting some of those same patterns of behavior as regular male incels. So, for example, a regular male incel will be on the forums telling his friends that he ran into a woman and asked her out, but the woman told him no. And so he insulted her. He told her, well, you're not even that pretty to begin with. I was just asking you out of pity. It's not like you're worth my time anyway. That's an example of what a male incel would do. Female incel would kind of do the same thing. And that's what this content started shifting towards. It stopped being, oh, you, my followers, my women, you guys should have higher standards. It started being, well, if a man rejects you, insult him, because he's not all that anyway. And this was all under the guise that, well, I have high standards and you should have high standards too. But guys, I'm gonna hold your hand when I say this. These women do not have higher standards, and they're not advocating for you to have higher standards. These women are justifying their singlehood by saying, well, I have standards, that's why I'm single. But they're actually single because their personality sucks. And they're awful people to be around. And if you follow in their footsteps, you're also going to be as miserable as they most likely are. They're not the pinnacle of female empowerment. They're just bitches. I hate to use that word, but that's what they are. You can tell by a couple of different ways. And I'm going to tell you how I can tell that they're just being bitches. Number 1, they continue dating. Number 2, they advocate being mean to the men instead of just moving on and protecting your peace. 3, after going viral for doing a certain thing, they do that thing over and over and over again to get the same views and clicks. Now, I'm not saying that if you have high standards, you shouldn't date, because that would lead us nowhere. And that also kind of implies that there are no men that can meet those standards, which is not true. What I'm saying is that these women often only continue dating to get more story material. So, for example, they will go on a first date and then they will go on their TikTok and rant all about that first date and tell their audience that guy sucked. This is why you should have high standards. This is why you should follow in my footsteps. This is why you should listen to what I'm saying. But then they go on a second date with the same guy that they were ranting about. And then after their second date, they come on their TikTok and they say, this is why you should have high standards, this is why you should follow in my footsteps, this is why you should do exactly as I'm doing, and this is why you should continue following me. That's what I mean by they continue dating, is not they continue dating in general, but they continue dating the same guys that they're ranting about, or the same type of guys that they're advocating against dating. Also, the red flags that they talk about that were present in their first dates or second dates or whatever, tend to not really be red flags at all and tend to be massively blown out of proportion. Now, I'm someone who spots a red flag as soon as I see one, and I will tell my friends, hey, this is a red flag. And there are so many small things that you would never even consider are red flags, but within the context that they are presented in, they absolutely are red flags. So again, when I first started following these creators and they were being somewhat reasonable, I agreed with them and I related so much to them because I felt like they were me and I was them. However, then they started going more and more into this is a red flag, this is a red flag, and I started thinking, no, those are not red flags. And again, this is coming from someone who the smallest little thing I will call a red flag because it is. So let's give an example. Let's say that this woman went on a first date and they were going, on a simple coffee date, nothing big, but there was no on-site parking and the only parking was either street parking or parking behind the building. If their partner chose not to parallel park and instead park behind the building or park in a nearby free parking situation and then had to walk to the cafe, these women would get on their TikToks and they would be like, ladies, it is a red flag if your man does not know how to parallel park. They would then escalate the situation by saying, he made me walk in the blazing sun in a mini dress and 4-inch high heels and I could not stand it. And that's when I knew that I would never date that guy ever again. But let's dissect the situation. Based off of, other details that she gives, you can typically excuse the behavior of the man. You can typically spot, okay, this is why this happened, and this is why it's not a red flag. So in this example scenario that I'm giving, parallel parking is really difficult to do. And it's really difficult to do, especially if there's traffic. You most likely will be honked at or yelled at or beeped at for obstructing the path of other cars. And often if there's bumper to bumper traffic, you can't parallel park anyway because either there is no space or you can't reverse into the parking spot because somebody has already gone ahead, right? So if you find a parking spot and you go forward, the car behind you will also go forward enough that you then cannot reverse into the parking spot. But number two, and so that's what I mean, it's like they will give this scenario and they will yell at the camera, they will point at the camera, they will tell you, and this is why we have high standards. But then when you really dissect the story, it doesn't make sense that she's so outraged, and it's actually just normal behavior. And if that the opposite situation was presented where there was no parallel parking and he had to park somewhere else kind of far away from the cafe, if he offered to carry her to the restaurant, she would also be on TikTok yelling and ranting and pointing at the camera, telling you, he will not let me be an independent woman, this is a sign of controlling behavior, and this is a red flag. So it's like, okay, well, the man cannot win then. And again, if you guys have watched my content before, this is not me at all saying that we should give men second chances when they mess up, but this is me saying that these men have not messed up. So the second chances, they're not second chances because they haven't done anything wrong. And look, like I've already said before on my podcast, it's so much fun to talk about awful men with your friends and to tell your friends, oh my god, this guy sucks. Like, all men suck, and you're in the privacy and the comfort of your own home or in your friend's house or on FaceTime or whatever, and you're laughing about like, oh my god, men suck, right? But when you become an influencer and when you have hundreds of thousands of followers, if not millions of followers, it becomes your responsibility to safely talk about these kinds of conversations. And encouraging your female followers to insult men based on their appearance is not safe in the slightest. And it's actually kind of very irresponsible. This content also reminds me of the other side of the coin of women showing off their incompetent husbands. If you think about it, here's the coin, right? On one side, you have women that are showing their incompetent husbands and then defending them and saying, no, I love this man and he loves me and we're going to be together forever. On the other side of the coin, you have this woman going on a date with a man who, according to her, was not the best person he could be. Both types of content induce rage, but only one type of content induces rage that is directed at the creator, and that is the kind of content where the woman is showing off her incompetent husband and then defending him. The kind of content that induces kind of positive rage is the kind of content where the woman is saying, and this is why men are losers. However, both kinds of women are centering men on their TikTok pages, and both kinds of women are still dating men. And I bring this up because a lot of the criticism that people have about the women showing off their incompetent husbands is that they stay with their incompetent husbands. However, when the woman showing off an incompetent first date continues going on dates with incompetent men, she instead gets positive feedback because she's continuing to show that side of incompetent men, and she's kind of a vessel for people to live vicariously through. The content really only serves as a way to live vicariously through her. What do I mean by this? Well, when you watch that kind of content as a woman, and maybe if you have been hurt by a man, but you no longer have access to that man, you can no longer talk to that man either because he changed phone numbers or because you blocked him or because, he's out of your life completely. When you come across this kind of content of this woman angrily sending a text message insulting the incompetent first date that she just had, telling him that he's bald, he's ugly, he's this, he's that, you kind of feel a sense of, yeah, if I still had access to that man that hurt me, that's what I would tell him, for sure. And so then you start encouraging her to continue making more content like that so that you can then live vicariously through the content that she is making. And it makes you feel good because you're kind of imagining yourself in that same situation and you're kind of thinking, man, I wish I could come up with insults like that. Next time a man hurts me, I'm going to borrow insults from this creator because she's so good at coming up with insults. And that's what I mean by you're able to live vicariously through that kind of content, is because maybe deep down inside of you, you do wish that you had said something in the moment and that you had come up with clever insults to really hurt the man, kind of like how he hurt you. So when you see a woman actually living that life and actually having the courage and bravery to insult the man in the way that she's insulting him, it makes you feel a sense of not only validation, but it makes you kind of feel like, I can do it too. Yeah, next time that this happens, I will do it. I will borrow from these insults. I will borrow from what she's saying and I will insult the man that hurt me. But it kind of becomes a cycle of you wanting a man to hurt you so that then you can use those insults. And that is where the problem lies, is that these women, these femcel creators are saying, no, my content is all about empowering women and showing women that they can have high standards and still be in a quality relationship. But instead what they're doing is showing women that they can create good insults, ? It's encouraging women to get hurt. It's encouraging women to seek out relationships just for the opportunity to use clever insults and just for the opportunity to go viral. So it causes more harm than good for sure. And it makes sense that this content would be framed like this because rage marketing sells. Have you guys ever heard of rage bait? Hannah Alonso has talked about rage bait, but it's basically content where the person creating the content is doing something that induces rage, and then that gets you to engage with that rage-inducing content. So for example, one example of rage bait would be someone cooking something, but then when they're pouring something into a different container, they pour all messily. And then that gets you to comment something like, "Oh, it's so frustrating how you can never pour straight." Suddenly, your engagement gets them millions of views and millions of other people saying your way of pouring things is so rage-inducing. And more views and more engagement equals more money. And like I said, this kind of rage-inducing content that these femcel creators are creating is not just rage-inducing content for the sake of getting you to engage. It's rage-inducing content for the sake of getting you to act on that rage, which is also what a lot of these male incels tend to do to their community, that tend to do to the people that are reading their forum posts. They're wanting other men to act on the rage. They're wanting other men to act on the rage that women are never going to pay attention to them. And then that's what leads them to insulting women kind of out of nowhere. That's also what leads them to killing women a lot of the times. But again, we're going to talk about that a little bit later. These femcel creators get more engagement, like I said, not just because they're relatable in the sense that so many women have been hurt by men and then are now wishing, "Oh, I wish I had come up with an insult so clever," but also because of the rage. Also because of the sense of that, how dare he do that? Especially if their storytelling ability is so good. They tend to keep the audience engaged while also keeping the audience engaged in a way that makes them care about them. So it's not just about inducing rage, it's also about getting people to care about you so that then they can comment, "Oh, Queen, you're so right. That's how you should have responded. Oh my god, your insults are so clever." It's also important to remember that the creators like Drew Afuwalo, who mention characteristics of men as a way to insult, for example, their baldness or their patchy beard or their weight, are still hurting women as well with those comments, and also the men that are on our side. It makes the men that are on our side not want to be so much on our side anymore, and it just isolates us as women even more. It's just not worth it to divide people like this. It's not worth it to create this sort of violence, like I said, verbal violence towards people who aren't even part of what you're arguing against. A lot of the time, the insults are general insults that can be used on anyone, not just the men that they are talking about, such as, like I said, patchy beard, baldness, weight, and it becomes more about the shock value instead of female empowerment. But anyway, now we have to talk about the dangerous side of this content. For the most part, actually, I take that back. At the beginning, these women had the right idea. You should have higher standards for yourself when choosing a partner, especially if you're choosing a partner that you want to get married to and spend the rest of your life with and have kids with. That is super, super duper important. Like I've kind of talked about in previous episodes on my podcast, if you marry a man that is using weaponized incompetence at the beginning of your relationship, and then you choose to have kids with that man is not going to change diapers. And if you ask him to change a diaper, he's probably going to change it in such a way that your baby still gets a rash. And it just adds on more stress to your already stressful life. Being in a highly stressful relationship can be very dangerous and can lead to certain medical conditions, such as early death because of heart failure. So it's important that not just women, but also men and other people choose their partners very carefully, especially, like I said, if you're going to spend the rest of your life with that person and if you're going to have kids with that person. However, teaching women to reject men by insulting them is probably the most irresponsible thing I have ever seen online. Almost every month, a news story will come out in the news about a woman who was murdered by a complete stranger who was rejected by her. And often, these women won't be rejecting the man by insulting them. These women will be rejecting the man in the nicest way possible, because we as women have been taught that if we reject a man, we have to be as kind as possible to look out for our own safety. So they're not gonna stand there and be like, ugh, no, I don't date ugly men, get out of my way. They're instead gonna be like, oh no, I'm so sorry, I already have a boyfriend, but I guess we could be friends, That is how we have been taught as women to reject men. And even being so polite and so nice in your rejection can still get you killed. If you search up woman killed after rejecting man, so many news articles will come up about so many different women and teenage girls who were killed by the men that they rejected. And like I said, as women, we have been taught to reject men in the nicest way possible to keep safe. Safety is the number one priority. So like I said, teaching women to reject men by insulting them is highly irresponsible, especially with the rise of the alpha male podcasts and influencers like Andrew Tate, who advocate for human trafficking and abusing women. And it's not just encouraging women to reject men who ask them out on a date, it's encouraging women to reject men and insult men who have these women's phone numbers. Because remember, these femcel influencers are encouraging their followers to go on dates in order to have this cathartic experience of insulting a man. So what often happens is that these followers go on dates with men and they will give them their phone numbers or they will give them their address, and then after a couple of dates, will insult the shit out of that man. And often, these women won't even insult the men that they say that they're insulting. They'll record a video of themselves saying something outrageous like, well, your male pattern baldness is blah, 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 right? Unattractive, whatever. But then she won't actually send the message, or if she's recording herself supposedly talking to a man in person, she won't actually be talking to the man that she's rejecting in person. Often she'll just be talking to the air, or she'll be talking to somebody that she knows, and she'll pull them aside and say, hey, why don't we film this video where I pretend to reject this man? So it's not even like she is courageous or brave like she positions herself to be. She's just lying for views because that is what gets her the views. And yet her followers are encouraged to follow in her footsteps. And they might, like I said in the privacy TikTok episode, they might even follow in her footsteps to their detriment. For example, Brie was someone who just followed the lifestyle influencers that she watched and then created her own content, and in turn ended up getting fired because she violated policies at her work. And it's because people follow in influencers' footsteps without actually thinking through the consequences. And that is what is most concerning to me, and that is my main concern, and why I am even talking about this in the first place, is I don't want you guys to follow in those people's footsteps and end up dead, because that is a very real possibility. You can end up dead just by rejecting a man in the nicest way possible. Imagine how much your chances increase when you reject a man with insults that you got from a creator who isn't even brave enough to fully practice what she preaches. I already kind of touched on this a little bit, but I have to expand more on it. Let's talk about why men and teenage boys have become so violent. When podcasts started becoming more accessible and easy to create, more and more people started creating their own podcasts. I mean, this podcast is as a result of how easy it was to create my own podcast. This helped give rise to the alpha male podcaster. These are men who had an issue with women having so many rights, so they started podcasts complaining about how women had too many freedoms, too many rights, and shouldn't have that, and should actually go back to serving men and being submissive to men. And also that we as a society should go back to an era where women couldn't vote, so that we could prevent liberal or woke policies from being enacted into constitution and law, right? So they often would complain about Roe v. Wade and how that was passed as a law. These men marketed their podcasts towards young men and teenage boys. And so then that demographic of young men and teenage boys who likely haven't had a relationship got sucked into listening to that kind of podcast because their loneliness was validated. These were men that were telling them that, oh, women are bitches and you shouldn't listen to them, and you know what, they're ugly, and if you haven't dated one, it's okay to just take it by force, and it's okay to lose your virginity by raping a woman, because women at the end of the day are just objects, and women at the end of the day don't deserve any freedoms and don't deserve any rights, and you as a man, it is your job and it is your place to take sex whenever and wherever you want it. Many of these young men and teenage boys started to feel entitled to having women because they no longer saw women as human beings. They instead saw women as objects, things to own. And the more women that you owned, the better you were. Such was the case with Andrew Tate's audience, who justified him practicing sex trafficking and participating in sex trafficking by saying, well, that just means that he's an alpha Chad or whatever. Again, slang is a generation below mine, so I'm not really sure how to use the slang properly, but you get the gist, you get the idea. They looked up to Andrew Tate for sex trafficking and human trafficking and abusing women because, well, women are objects that you should own, and if they misbehave, you should beat them up. So now, when a woman rejects a man, the man, instead of thinking, oh, okay, I'm just going to move on and practice healthy coping mechanisms to get over this rejection because she is ultimately a human being and she has her own rights and freedoms and she is able to reject me whenever she wants and however she wants, now men are thinking, how dare she reject me? And that rage can make them act in such a way that gets that woman killed. Now, as I'm saying this, it's important for me to make you guys understand that this is not in the human nature of men. These men, these young men and teenage boys have been fed propaganda and lies to act in such a way. And it is our responsibility as a society to stop that and to correct that behavior. However, these female influencers, these female incels, femcells as I like to call them, tend to say that this is in the man's human nature. Man tends to be violent because that is who men are. Men are inherently violent, which is not the case. Men are not inherently violent. They just have been taught to be violent as a coping mechanism. But until we fix this problem with incels and with people like Andrew Tate and the Fresh and Fit hosts and Nick Fuentes, we really, as women, need to stop advocating for other women to insult the shit out of men that we reject. Like I said, that is not smart at all, and it is highly irresponsible, especially if you have a platform where you have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of followers. Yes, you should encourage women to be careful with who they choose to spend the rest of their life with, but you should not do it in such a way that you are causing such inflammatory reactions, not just out of the women that follow you, but out of the men who may stumble upon your content. Now, like I said, it's not in man's human nature to be violent, but a lot of these young men and teenage boys who have been fed this propaganda tend to come across this content and tend to feel even more validated in what their idols are saying, which is cause for concern and leads to even more dangerous situations. It leads to that young man or that teenage boy to feel even more isolated and feel even more rage towards women. Anyway, to end on a lighter note, let me share my recommendations and what I have recommended my friends to do and what I myself am following. What I recommend to do is to unfollow these female creators that are just inducing rage in you. It is not healthy for you to be acting out of rage. But once you unfollow that female influencer, you should also take the time to learn more about yourself. Learn more about what is a deal breaker for you and what isn't a deal breaker for you. It's also important for you to evaluate why you want to be single if you want to be single at all. Like I mentioned, a lot of the time, these women that are making such inflammatory content are not single out of choice. They're single because their personality sucks. And yet, they're using that as a marketing opportunity to go viral online. Their personality sucks and they can't get a boyfriend and they feel some type of way about it. So then they project their anger and their rage onto the men that have rejected them. Because again, their personality sucks. So it's very important for you to evaluate whether you even want to be single at all. What if you don't want to be single and the only reason you're telling yourself you want to be single is because you follow these dangerous women? And if it turns out that you do want to be in a relationship and you do want to live that life of having a husband and having kids with your husband, it's important to understand what you want out of that relationship. Do you want marriage? Is marriage the end goal for you? Is having kids the end goal for you? Are you someone that is willing to get married but not willing to have kids? Are you someone that's willing to have kids but not willing to get married? Are you someone who is willing to have kids without first getting married? Or are you someone who wants to have kids and get married but get married first and then have kids? Like I said in a previous episode, it's important for you to evaluate whether you are someone who values your independence more than being with someone else, or whether you value being with someone else more than your independence. And it's also important for you to understand what is a red flag to you. It's also important for you to understand your own coping mechanisms and understand whether they are toxic or whether they're healthy for you. If you have toxic coping mechanisms, you're probably going to be more likely to stay in a relationship that is unhealthy for you. Now, I know that saying that you should love yourself before getting into a relationship can be problematic because people who don't love themselves still deserve to be loved. So I'm not necessarily saying that, but I am saying that you should learn to love yourself or start the process of learning to love yourself. Whether that means going to therapy or whether that means taking medication, you should start the process of trying to love yourself so that you have that courage to stand back on whenever or whether your partner does something that you do not like, that is not beneficial to you. It's also important to work on your anxiety for that same reason and to work on, say, if you're a people pleaser, it's important for you to understand that side of yourself and understand how to work with that side of yourself so that you're not stuck in a toxic relationship because you're a people pleaser. That can be highly dangerous for you. It's also important to have a community of people who care about you so that you're not obsessed with one person and so that your life does not revolve around that one person. Thankfully, none of my friends have really had that problem where their whole life revolves around that person, so I haven't seen firsthand how damaging it is, but I have heard of how damaging it is, and it can be extremely damaging to revolve your entire life around a single person, especially in such a toxic way where if you break up, you feel like you're nobody and you cannot find yourself or you have a hard time finding yourself again. Those are my recommendations and those are my things that I think you should look out for. As far as what you should look out for in a partner, I think you should look out for a partner whose political beliefs align with yours. And you should look out for a partner, and that's particularly important in this political climate. You really, really should look for a partner whose political beliefs align with yours, and you have to make sure that you have those uncomfortable conversations with whoever you're trying to date. Have them in such a way that is not dangerous for you, obviously, but have them still, and ask them, hey, what are your political beliefs? Tell me more about what you believe in. It's also important for you to understand what your partner's love language is and whether that is compatible. It's also important for you to understand whether you are compatible at all with your partner and to not rush the process because you feel like you're running out of time or you feel like you really, really want to have kids or you really want to be a stay-at-home wife. Also, things to look out for in a partner is somebody who will not force you to do something or another. Like I talked about in the first installment of this series, make sure that your partner has your best interest at heart, and should you have a medical procedure, make sure that your partner is willing to let you have that medical procedure. Also, like I said, don't rush into marriage. Dating is a really crucial part that you have to have in a relationship in order to understand whether you're compatible or not. If you do not date your partner, you will not get to know them sufficiently before you get married to them. And it is important that you do get to know them sufficiently before you get married to them and before you commit to them. Also, like I mentioned in a previous episode, understand whether you are somebody who will accept divorce or will not accept divorce. If you are someone who will not accept divorce, you have to be extra careful with the partner that you choose. You have to take extra steps, and you have to really, really understand and make sure that you are ready for marriage. If you are someone that is open to divorce, obviously don't go into a relationship thinking, well, I'm going to get divorced anyway, but still go into the marriage thinking, what is a deal breaker for me and what is divorce worthy to me? And then follow through or adjust your thoughts as your relationship progresses, and should your relationship meet any of those deal breakers. So yeah, those are the tips that I have for you guys. Let me know what you guys think about this topic and what you think about these female influencers, female creators. And yeah, that's all that I have for you today. Make sure to check out the links in the description, and I will talk to you guys next week. Bye!